The conservative movement is deeply split right now between the Israel First and the America First factions. The divide is growing sharper around the United States. Some conservative leaders insist that unwavering support for Israel is vital to our American interests, while others argue that Israel's battles betray the promise of America first and non-interference in the wars of others. There's a lot of key fault lines here, right? First, the America First camp, you have figures like Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Nick Fuentes. They all argue that U.S. foreign policy should avoid wars that don't directly serve American interests. And increasingly, Americans has said let them fight their own wars. In the Israel First camp, you have voices such as Ted Cruz, Mark Levin, and various pro-Israel donors that insist that defending Israel is inseparable from defending America. Mark Levin even rebukes his critics by taking the leftist narrative and calling them Nazis, anti-Semites, anti-American. The think tanks are starting to shift, right? Institutions like the Heritage Foundation, and that is signaling that we have a problem with people wanting to give unconditional support to Israel. Turning Point USA with Candace Owens and the Charlie Kirk controversy going on. Turning Point USA became a flashpoint after Charlie Kirk's assassination. And his friend Candace Owens, she has concerns about Trump possibly betraying the America First movement by allowing Israel First Republicans to hijack his MAGA movement. And her investigation into Charlie Kirk's assassination has found that Turning Point USA might just very well be engaged in a cover-up around donor influence and Israel policies. Charlie Kirk himself, there was leaked text messages, that showed that he was caught between factions, and he'd always for a long time been pro-Israel, but getting closer to his death, he was having worries about his advocacy for Israel, and there were hints that he was about to shift away from pro-Israel. I mean, he even told Tucker Carlson to go max against the Israelis in one of his speaking engagements. The reason why this matters, right, is various different things. You have strategic implications, right? On the strategic side, if America First hardliners succeed in this, U.S. foreign policy could shift away from Israel and more toward restraint, limiting aid, and limiting military involvement. There's also a cultural symbolism involved here, where Israel has kind of become a litmus test for loyalty within the conservative base, right? Supporting Israel is framed by some as patriotic, and others see it as a betrayal. The movement identity, this split has become existential, right? Conservatives are debating whether or not America First means prioritizing U.S. sovereignty above everything else, or whether Israel is going to be our ride or die, regardless of the cost. So that's where kind of the split lays right now within the Conservative Party. And it's coming to a big head right now. And the reason for that, I believe, is that pitting donor-driven loyalty against populist restraint. And the outcome of this is going to shape foreign policy going forward in the future post-Trump administration. And it's also going to shape the identity of the Conservative Party, right? President Trump is on his final term in office. The midterms are getting close, and the politicians on both sides are beginning to jockey for position as to who's going to be leaders in a post-Trump world. Conservatives are looking to strengthen their positions so that they may have a shot at some type of leadership. And then if we look at lobbying and political financing, right? AIPAC, this is where they come in. AIPAC is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. And they're the most prominent pro-Israel lobby that channels millions of dollars into U.S. elections every cycle, funding candidates who provide unconditional support to aid for Israel, and those who also work to unseat the anti-Israel critics. And this influence that AIPAC has is especially strong in the Republican Party. I mean, they do work within the Democrat Party as well, but they're especially strong in the Republican Party, where pro-Israel positions are basically a litmus test for loyalty. There's also an intelligence aspect to this whole thing, right? Reports have suggested that Israel has used intelligence ties to gain leverage. For example, Jeffrey Epstein. He's been alleged to have acted as an Israeli intelligence asset, gathering information and compromising material on the U.S. elites. Right? In the past, AIPAC staff have been accused of transmitting Pentagon secrets, and all of this stuff just goes to highlight the blurred lines between the lobbying and the espionage. Now, this is extremely highly important. You really need to pay attention to this part, okay? The U.S. provides $3.8 billion annually in military aid to Israel under a 10-year Memorandum of Understanding framework. We're going to talk about this Memorandum of Understanding here in just a few more minutes. Right? Israel is also seen as a forward base in the Middle East. Right? We have joint research and development projects going on. We share intelligence with them. We do weapons testing with them, and that keeps the two nations kind of tied together in a military sort of way. And the critics argue that this aid actually entrenches U.S.'s involvement in Israel's wars and undermining sovereignty in the American First movement. And they're kind of right. We're going to talk about that. But there's also a cultural and religious influence that's going on here as well. Evangelical Christians, they've long reinforced support for Israel, at least since the 60s, and they frame it as a biblical covenant, right? And there's a theological backing that goes along here that makes Israel more than just a foreign ally, right? We take it on as some kind of sacred cause for many conservatives. But it leaves the public perception that many Americans believe Israel has too much support and too much influence over U.S. policy, and only about 10%, think that we don't do enough for them. Israel's hold on America is multi-layered, okay? It's seen as financial with campaign donations, PACs. It's seen as institutional with Congress access and legislation. The intelligence community, they leverage through espionage. There's a cultural and religious faction, this creates a narrative where Israel is not just an ally, but they hold a structural position and a structural presence inside U.S. politics. They actually shape decisions before they even reach for public debate. In fact, it's written into our law, and I'm going to explain that to you right now. Now, when I say it's written into law, what I'm talking about here is there's a requirement that's codified into U.S. law under the concept of Israel's qualitative military edge, or QME. Now, I'm going to read a little bit of this here to you. The definition of QME is as Israel's ability to counter and defeat any credible military threat from a neighboring state or coalition through superior weapons, training, and technology. This idea first appeared in the late 1970s and was formalized in the Arms Export Control Act, AECA, Arms Export Control Act. The codification happened in the Bush administration in 2008 when Bush's Congress passed the Naval Vessel Transfer Act of 2008, which amended the AECA to explicitly require that any U.S. arms sales in the Middle East must preserve Israel's QME. The implementation of this law requires the Department of Defense, or now Department of War, to consult with Israel before approving any arms sales to other Middle Eastern countries, ensuring those sales don't erode Israel's military edge. Now, that Memorandum of Understanding I was talking about, this is where this plays in. In 2016, under the Obama administration, the Memorandum of Understanding on Security Assistance between USA and Israel was signed. Right? It made the largest U.S. military aid package ever pledged to Israel at that point. We committed $38 billion over a 10-year period from 2019 to 2028 in military assistance. which included funding for their missile defense systems like the Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow. And why this matters is extremely important here, because it gave Israel a structural guarantee. Unlike any other allies that we have, Israel's military superiority is not just a policy, it's written into our law. Think about that. It's written into our law. The practical effect is if the U.S. wants to sell advanced jets or missiles to somebody like Saudi Arabia or Qatar or Egypt or the UAE, we have to first certify to Congress that Israel's QME will remain intact and they will remain having a military edge. We have to prove that to Congress before we can sell weapons anywhere in the Middle East. That's a symbolic impact that elevates Israel from being our ally to something closer to a protected client state, right? With America law-abiding U.S. sovereignty into Israel's security needs. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. U.S. sovereignty is bound to Israel's security needs by law through both the Bush administration and the Obama administrations. The takeaway on this is that when people say U.S. law requires maintaining Israel's military superiority, now you know what they're talking about. It's one of the clearest examples of how Israel's interests are structurally embedded into the U.S. policy, not just through lobbying or donor influence, but through binding legislation. With the MOU being in year 9 right now, or at least the agreement of it, 7 since it took effect, renegotiations should happen shortly, and likely after the midterm elections. So you can understand now why Israel has a vested interest in the winner of this conservative split between America first and Israel first. When it comes to midterms and a post-term presidency, you can see where the money, the influence, and the narrative will lead. Keep your eye on the money, keep your eye on the narrative, and you'll know where it's going to go. Thanks for listening to me today.